Today you are only candidates. Candidate Andrew Ross cited work-related issues that prevented him from attending this interview. Please project your voice as you're being recorded. Please hold your responses to 3 minutes or less per question. We'll provide 2 cues for 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining for time on the clock, and 1 follow-up question may be asked per question. First question is, what qualifies you to be the Lake County District Attorney?
In my background, I started early on in the criminal justice system just by going to Santa Rosa Junior College to their police school and classes. I was a campus policeman for a year. Then I joined the Sheriff's Department in 1975, actually 1973 for 2 years as a reserve, then full-time in 1975, and I worked there for 15 years. I was a deputy sheriff, worked mainly patrol. I did undercover narcotics, field training, and 2 years of major crime investigation. Also during that time, I was elected 5 times as the Deputy Sheriff's Association president. In my last 4 years as a deputy, I was going to law school, completed the program. And so I've always had this desire to be involved in the criminal justice system. After law school, though, I elected not to go into the DA's office, and I decided to go into private practice. And I worked private practice for about 20 years. And during that time, I did some criminal law defensive work. Also, I did civil litigation and some family law. Then, about 4 years ago now, I saw there was a lot of problems in the criminal justice system. The DA's office, which I was very close to, had some reputation problems. They also had some real problems getting convictions. At that time, there was a 58% conviction rate, which was very low. So I was encouraged, and I succumbed to the idea of running for district attorney. And I did, and luckily I was elected. And I've been district attorney for 3.5 years now. And you might say the qualifications, I think, or ability has been proven over the last 3.5 years of what I've done with the district attorney's office. I've changed that 58% conviction rate to, in 3 years, to a 85% conviction rate. And at the same time, even prosecuting a little bit more cases. When I say prosecuting, I mean prosecuting into jury trials or court trials. At this point now, we have one of the highest conviction ratings in the entire state. Put our office against any other office. I've drafted the first ever policy and procedure manual for the district attorney's office, the first ever Brady policy for our office. I think I've gained the respect of almost every law enforcement agency or chief of police in this county. I think every law enforcement officer has some respect for me, even those in the Sheriff's Department, which we have a very good relationship with the rank and file members of the Sheriff's Department. And things have been going extremely good at the Sheriff's Office. And so you might say the proof is in the pudding. We're doing a good job. I have a great crew. They not only prosecute cases successfully, but they also, the type of cases they prosecute are good cases. We've really improved the integrity of the cases that go to trial and get convictions.
Can you provide some alternatives to jail time for nonviolent repeat drug offenders or those who suffer from mental illnesses?
Drug offenders is difficult within our office because there's very little programs out there. We have they call it Prop 36 program, or a diversion program, which gives some counseling. And if you complete the program, then that's part of the conditions of, say, your probation or deferred entry of the judgment. I wish there was more, but right now Lake County doesn't have the facilities to. So when we set sentencing, we always set sentencing based upon the individual person. It's not just a chart we go by where if you commit this crime, you have this record, and so this is what we think your sentence should be. What we do is we also look at the individual, and if they have special needs, we try to make that a condition of your probation. Say for instance, just recently I approved a deal where a person normally would do a lot of jail time, but instead I built in a sentence where he has to do counseling, either with mental health or private counseling. Now that one individual, the offers been made, has been accepted, but I don't think it's been actually approved by the courts yet, but it will be. Another instance which has been highly critical of my administration in the early stages was a case which my opponent and the sheriff has brought up several times. And I don't want to use names even though it's been brought up before, but it was a gentleman who had exposed himself at the city park. Well, as it turns out, that this guy had a complete, total mental breakdown. And that was confirmed by his psychologist, both from New York. He said this is not what he's normally like, and it's totally out of character. Prior to me taking office, a deal was made. There would be no jail time for him, and there would be 1 year summary probation. Now, when I got in, first of all, the defendant would not take this deal because it required him to register as a sex offender. And we would have gone to trial on it. And there's a very, very good chance we would have lost that trial, because there's two things a part of indecent exposure. One is you have to expose yourself, and the other one is you have to have the mental capacity, the mental state of mind to sexually gratify yourself or somebody else. So there's a good chance we would have lost that, which we could not prove his mental state of mind, because just where he was. As a matter of fact, when he was arrested by the police, they had to tase him. And as they put him back in the patrol car, he asked the police officer to tase him again so he can get the demons out. That was his mental state. So instead of making him register as a sex offender, I made him a deal. Instead of 1 year probation, you have 3 years probation. You have to monthly go to a psychologist in the state of New York and be treated. And that psychologist has to report to me every 3 months of his condition, which he did. He completed probation for 3 years, and as I understand it, he's doing very well. So, getting back, that's kind of where I look at the individual more so than just the crime or how we can punish him.
What would be your top priorities if you were elected district attorney?
My top priorities, one is to keep the conviction rate high, 85%, what we were at in 2013. Now I think we're right about 90% in 2014. And also keep the integrity of the cases going to trial. That's a priority. Another priority is maintain the cooperation I have with other department heads. And unfortunately, the sheriff and I have very little cooperation. With a new sheriff, I know both candidates, I think we can obtain that cooperation through all agencies. Have a great relationship with the Lieutenant of the Highway Patrol, both police chiefs, and the other, about 7 other law enforcement agencies in the state, in this county, I'm sorry. And we work really well together. When all agencies can work well, which I really hope we can do, is we can work together to improve the quality of the investigations, improve the procedures. Quite often now we have difficulties in some of the investigations, things not being done, but we don't always have the cooperation to do things. For instance, we have just recently received approval to obtain a 3D laser scanner machine. It's a great machine. It's like something you would see on CSI. I was able to get the cooperation of both the police departments. Unfortunately, CHP cannot be, it's a state organization. But one agency would not participate, probably just because of the animosity between him and myself. But we will use this scanner for any place a crime happens in the county. But it would have been nice to have that cooperation. When we have that cooperation, it will stretch far beyond what we have now. Another priority, or something I want to do, is attack marijuana, maybe a little bit different of a stage in which we're dealing now. My emphasis on marijuana is, one, how it affects the environment. It destroys a lot of things in the environment, and I want to go after the growers and the landowners, not only criminally but civilly, to a point where it's going to hit them in the pocketbook, which is a plan I have. I presented the plan to the board, and unfortunately they don't have the funds to finance this program. I'm going to keep attacking this though. I want to improve training and education for my deputy DAs and my investigators. In fact, just the next Thursday and Friday, we're putting on a search warrant class for not only law enforcement officers in this county, but several other counties. It's just those type of things we want to do just to improve the quality of prosecution and investigations. I think we have two very good candidates, and I could talk about both candidates. I have a personal preference who I'm going to support and who I'm going to vote for, but I don't think it's right for me as a district attorney to use my office to endorse or support one candidate. Bob Chalk and I have known each other for many years. I think I joined the sheriff's office in '75, and he joined in '76, or somewhere close to that. So we worked together for a long time. He's a great guy. Unfortunately, he's my age, and spent a lot of time in law enforcement. I'm not saying there's a bad thing against Bob, but I think the sheriff's office needs a lot of young ideas, a lot of energy, and it's going to need somebody who wants to be there for a long time. I think Bob can do a great job on a short-term basis. Brian Martin, is extremely energetic. He is very articulate and very intelligent person. I can trust both candidates, Bob and Brian. And I'll be able to work very well with either one of the two. And as far as Sheriff Rivero, I'll pass on comments about him.
Mr. Anderson, if Sheriff Rivero is reelected, how does that hurt your department in pursuing its goals in the next 4 years if you're reelected? Would that hurt you? Is that something you have to go around? Is it extra work, or is it something you can overcome?
It is extra work. Things have been relatively quiet between the sheriff and I over the last year. Before that, I was probably devoting a good 20-25% of my time dealing with issues around the sheriff himself. It's unfortunate, but it's very time consuming. We would have our problems, just like we always have. We have our difficulties, but to be clear, we work extremely well with the deputy sheriffs. They're always in our office. They talk to us, talk over cases, and things will work as part of the criminal justice system. I think the most difficult things that come up is sometimes he interjects himself in cases and does things that are maybe on spur of the moment without thinking things out. He has a tendency to violate people's constitutional rights, which is something I cannot tolerate. He has a tendency to put his officers' safety in jeopardy, which again, I cannot tolerate that. I cannot stand by without doing anything, which is one of the reasons why I started my investigations about 3 years ago in some of his activities. But if he is elected, we will work through it. We have for the last 3.5 years, and we'll continue to grow with him in there or without him in there.
Regarding Proposition N, which is on the June ballot, does your office take any stand on that?
Well, in the office, there's mixed feelings on it. Some of our deputies are pro Proposition N, some are against Proposition N. But as the DA's office or position, we're not taking a position. It will not really affect us at all. If there are violations of the county ordinance, it is handled by code enforcement administratively through county counsel's office. We will not prosecute those county ordinances. If a marijuana case comes up, we're going to use state law for the prosecution. It has a lot more bite to it, and it's not. We will not constitutionally be challenged. So we're not going to spend a lot of time and money fighting cases for what could be equivalent to a couple $100 fine. We'll let code enforcement and the sheriff's office deal with that.
You were a deputy sheriff, reserve deputy sheriff 2 years, and then a deputy sheriff 15 years.
Yes, correct.
That must help you in your job as district attorney in terms of working with the sheriff's department, even if you don't have the cooperation of the sheriff. Also, I think it would help you in your job as far as determining what is important and what is not important. Very
much so. I mean, I can always relate back to the instances I was involved in. In particular, we've had several officer-involved shootings recently, and I don't want to say counsel, but I've discussed some of these with some of the officers that have been involved in those shootings. And actually, a few years ago, I wrote a book in regards to my involvement in the shooting. I've shared the meaning of that book with these officers. So I can relate to what they're going through. I can relate to people in the streets, what crime is like, not from reading a book or reading a police report, but from actually being out there in the streets and seeing what the victims see, seeing what the defendants see, as well as the law enforcement officers.
Can you tell us a little bit about the subject of your book, the officer who was shot, and your participation?
Okay. The book was about a killing of one of our sergeants in 1981, Sergeant Richard Helbush. What had occurred is this methamphetamine addict, Amicadizi, and a heroin addict, William Cox, had killed somebody in San Joaquin County to steal some cash and so they can buy the drugs. And which they did. They executed them in this little sting they had going. They fled San Joaquin County, came to Lake County, and they were looking for Annika's son, who was living with the father up in Clear Lake. Thereby on Manning Flat, or just west of Manning Flat, they got a flat tire, pulled alongside the road, and Sergeant Helbush came to help them out. And they pulled a gun, and in essence, they executed him. They stole his patrol car and his pistol. Then they fled up Seagood Canyon Road to top of Cobb Mountain. I happened to be working in the Middletown area that day, and we caught up with them. We got in a shootout. So the book is about the crime and also the after effects, how it affects the police officer when they're involved in such an incident. We had a backup officer, which is a Harvard patrolman, who was there towards the tail end of the shootout and got involved in it himself and actually discharged a couple of rounds. Well, that experience on him was very traumatic. It turned him to alcohol very bad. He became semi-paranoid, and he eventually had to leave law enforcement. And talking to his widow sometime later after he died, he hasn't said he just changed him, and he turned to alcohol really bad, became an alcoholic, and in essence drank himself to death. So my book discusses how it affected me, it affected the Harvard Patrolman, and hopefully it's going to help somebody go through those situations.